And good day, everyone. Finally getting around to painting that sketch I shared with my son. That is Arch 140-pound cold pressed paper. It's a 9 by 12, and I've got it taped off so the image size is around 8 by 10. The sky, I wet the background, just dampened it more or less with my mop brush, and now I'm going in with that's some yellow ochre I'm using in and around the horizon line. So that is that's the raw sienna I'm dropping into the mid sky. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to see Grady's painting before I started mine, but I was ill and ended up watching it, and now he's in my head because he says I'm rather predictable, and I guess he's right. So anyway, my sky at the top is it's going for a darker look, and I'm just dropping in. The board's laying flat, by the way, and with the paper damp, I'm just dropping in some pigment and see if I can get some interesting cloud shapes or make for an interesting sky. So in watercolor terms, this is called fussing. So I let the whole thing dry, walked away, and came back. So what again? I've got yellow ochre in at the horizon, some raw sienna, and then a combination of blues, Payne's gray, and purple in the upper sky. Now what I'm doing here is I'm wetting the background. I just dampened the paper in above the horizon line, and I'm dropping in a tree line in the back. Now for the foreground, rather than wet the whole thing and do wet and wet, I'm trying something different, a little different anyway, that I haven't done in a little while. I'm just dry brushing the entire foreground, and this is the first approach or first run at it. So it's just a little bit of yellow ochre to create some texture. So that house in the middle is slightly turned. So by the way, I've decided my lighting is going to be coming from the right. So there'll be a bit of shadow on that on the chimney on that house in the middle. So I put a little stone wall in beside the house in the front. So I started out by wetting the area with some very thin raw sienna, and now I'm just adding in some other colors. So there's some Payne's gray and burnt sienna, a bit of purple. Now my thinking with the dark sky, sky's not quite dark enough yet, is that I'd have really solid colors for the trees in the foreground. I wanted to be, yeah, I was going for a darker look. So it may not look like it here, but I'm starting out with yellow ochre. I dropped in a bit of cadmium yellow on the right side of the foliage. And then I'm going to get aggressive with some greens. So what I'm mixing up there, that's some indigo and a bit of sap green. I'm going to use the same approach for this tree that's to the right of the house. Really thick mix of yellow ochre and cadmium yellow. Mostly yellow ochre though. And just doing some negative painting. And that really helps define the roof too. And it once I get the greens in, it pretty well told me which way I was going to go with the roof colors. So that's the way it dried. I hit the that tree on the right with a bit of salt as well. And so far so good. Still not happy with my sky, but things are shaping up nicely. So here's the color I decided on for the roof on this house. Hadn't decided about the others yet. So I'm putting in a cadmium yellow for the undercolor. And with it nice and wet, again, all wet and wet, I'm dropping in quinacridone gold on top of it. Now I have a few pencil sketches in, or pencil lines in, indicating that I was going to do a tile roof. But Grady predicted I would do a tile roof, so I opted not to do a tile roof. This is just kind of one of those, I can't think of the name of the material. It's like a tar paper stuff, but it's thick and rubbery. It's like an asphalt thing, so that's what I'm going with. While that roof is drying over on the right, I'm going to jump over here to the left-hand side. I mixed up a bit of shadow color of the ultramarine and Payne's gray and purple, and I'm just going to use the shadow to define the shape of that little outbuilding in the background. That being said, background is the operative word there. I wanted it pushed back a bit, so my blue is a bit too dark, so I'm just lifting out some of the color. And I actually hit it with the paper towel because it was just too much, so I can get back in after that later on. But I've kind of defined where that building is, and I do want it in the background. Now that part there I just painted is separated from the foreground. There's a little bit of gully there, or a dip where the fence is, or the stone wall. So I'm going to darken up the bottom side of it to show that it is that there is a dip in the ground. I had all my greens out, and I thought my tree over on the right was a bit flat. So using the greens, I just dropped it in on the underside of the foliage and just mopped it out a bit to soften. Now I'm starting to add some more color to that foreground. I just go in and I hit it with a few dry brush strokes and then walk away, and then I can get back after it later on. Now, as with when you start to add darker colors to other parts of the painting, you've got to match it up. At least I think you do. You have to match it up. So my tree over on the right got a bit dark, so I'm adding even more of the dark green and indigo on the underside of this tree on the right. Now with my buildings more or less done, I'm going in with some shadow color now. Now I opted to make my shadows rather intense. I wanted to make it look appear as if there's a really strong source of light. And while the house is drying, I can go in and do the trunk on the tree on the right. A little combination of raw sienna, burnt sienna, no, sorry, raw umber, burnt sienna, and I'm adding a few little bits of blue in there as well. Really small tree trunk, but I am doing all wet in wet, and I like the looks of having different colors in there rather than just a solid color for it. So I've grabbed a nice dark mix of the yellow ochre and cadmium yellow, and again laying my brush on the side and going with that dry brush look. I'm hoping to keep a few of those white bits. I probably rushed this a little too much. I probably should have waited till everything dried, but I tried to drop in some green and thought best that it wasn't going on the way I'd hoped. So I'm trying to be patient here, and I'll come in later with the green, maybe when it dries a little more. And there, I'm just grounding that large tree on the left by adding some shadow and going back over to that guy on the right and adding more shadow to that tree to ground it as well. Bit of blue and Payne's gray along the base just to really provide some contrast with the foreground and that wall. But I also want to keep the top of the stone wall relatively light because the light will be hitting it. And that seemed to work. So my house on the left, nice welcoming yellow door. That was almost cadmium yellow neat. It was quite opaque. And the neighbors going with the sap green door. And that is where my camera died. So I'm back, and foreground's nice and dry, so I'm getting a darker mix of the burnt sienna and a bit of Payne's gray in there. I'm painting my eaves trough. I started out with some Davies gray and a bit of Hooker's green going in and a bit of Payne's gray on the underside. So partway through this painting, I decided to keep it all simple and I don't know if you want to call it vibrant or not, but I wanted the buildings to jump out. And it's completely opposite of what Grady did with his dark rendition of the houses on a cliff. So this is a nice little happy countryside gathering of houses. Now here in the immediate foreground, again, this is dry brushing, and I'm just dragging my big old, what is that, number 12 round, loading it up with some color and just dragging it across paper and trying to create texture, and you can see which way the ground is going. So I think I've accomplished separating the foreground from the background, adding even darker greens in the foreground. It's more of a wet in the immediate foreground, just to really darken it up, to draw attention to the houses, little light bits around. And the third neighbor, he's got a cadmium red door. Of course, no house is complete without a bucket hanging from its roof. And I'm going to get this guy signed, and we'll get the tape off it and see what it looks like. And there it is. Thanks for dropping by, and we will see you again soon.